I'm really excited to have this customer panel put together today. Clay Richardson from Forrester will be moderating. And Clay, why don't I just hand it over to you and you can do introductions.
Yeah, and so first, thank you guys for coming back. And what we want to do in this panel is really have a candid conversation about BPM. And so you heard some of the future-looking aspects of BPM, but we want to talk more about just practical. How do you begin to adopt BPM, implement BPM? What are some of the success criteria? And then how do you build a successful program, let's say? And so before I get started, I'll give each one of the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. I think we're still going to take a second to do that. Yeah. So maybe we start with you.
Hi, I'm Doug Farmer from Corporation Service Company. I'm an IT manager, software architect. We've been using Bonitasoft for about 9 months now, and we have one process that's currently in production and two that are currently in development due to be in production in January. So far, we've had a very pleasurable experience with Bonitasoft.
Pleasurable, like that. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Joel Schaefer. I work for Opera Solutions. We are a consulting firm that specializes in predictive analytics, big data analytics solutions. So we are actually using Bonitasoft with one of our clients. It's a project that I'm running in the area of risk, specifically supplier risk, and the need for a workflow solution came up, and so that's how we are making use of Bonitasoft.
Hi guys, I'm Faizan Subani. I work for Teach for America. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring that we have quality teachers in high-need classrooms across the country. I'm a business analyst. We've been working with Bonitasoft for the last 6 to 9 months. We put our first process into production a few months ago and are working on development for upcoming processes as well.
Okay. So maybe we just start with, I'm always curious, what touches off BPM implementations, right? We have a lot of data. We shared some of the data on the drivers. A lot of times when I hear companies talk about what started their BPM program or their focus and interest in BPM, there's usually a simple answer, but then there's also a hidden answer, right? So people, I might hear, well, we started with compliance, right? I have some clients now where they're focused on compliance. But when we drill in, we learn something like, well, actually, the reason we're now doing this compliance initiative is because there was an outage on our banking website, right? And now we have to pay a fine. And so, you know, from a compliance standpoint, we had to roll this out. So there's almost this burning platform, that I use the term burning platform, but it's really a major pain point that someone had within the organization that was driving it. So maybe I'm curious, maybe Joel, if you can start and talk a little bit about what the major pain point was and major trigger. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you know, for our client, the major trigger was auditability, you know, trackability of this specific workflow process. So historically, it was a predominantly offline process handled through, you know, Word documents, Excel files, conversations, and, you know, a little bit of email as well. So the leaders, you know, this is in the area of supplier risk and that sort of assessment and management process. So the client leaders, you know, they would need to plug in and see at what point in the process, you know, the process was at various times, and that was a pain point. The ability to do that, you know, it would take a while to track it down and understand, you know, on whose plate, you know, the process was currently, you know, residing. So just auditing the process and tracking the process was, I think, key. In addition, sort of one of the benefits is really just efficiency and ensuring that the process actually moved forward in an efficient manner as quickly as possible so that projects, internal initiatives weren't held up.
So who would you say was the biggest champion of BPM role-wise?
In our case, I think the chief procurement officer.
Okay.
He was sort of a client sponsor, but it was really the executive leadership team that, you know, this process really touches all the lines of business at our client site. And so the leadership team would need to investigate and track this process at various points. So it was that leadership team that really were I guess the champions of this process and this solution.
So maybe Doug, what did you find? What was the trigger that got the interest going around business process management, or the thing that was keeping someone up at night? Kind of cliche term.
Oh gosh, I don't know if it kept anyone up at night, but I mean, it's in our name, right? We're a service organization. So as a service organization, everything we do is process-based, right? Okay. So it just makes sense that there are a set of steps. I mean, we talked about this earlier. There are a very defined set of steps that we need to accomplish, whether they be in a sequential order or in any order. But, they just need to be accomplished in order to be able to say that business outcome was achieved. So our stakeholders, if you want to, I guess the next question would be who was driving it.
Who was driving it?
Our stakeholders realized quickly that we have a lot of areas for improvement in what we do as an organization. Not just in automation, but in improving even the manual steps of the process. So they wanted us to evaluate a bunch of tools. And
was there one specific champion, though? Like what I find in BPM initiatives, there's usually one person that's kind of fanatical. If an initiative succeeds, there's this fanatical person who just goes out and talks about BPM all the time, and they see it as this thing that's going to save the world. There's usually that one person. I'm curious if you had that, or if you're that one person.
I was just going to say I'm
okay. So you're the fanatical BPM champion.
I would say yes, that I am, but I would also say that the leadership of my team as well is the champion of it, and being able to see, into the future of the things that we want to accomplish on our pipeline, how a BPM solution could help us achieve that faster than traditional software development.
What about for your environment?
Yeah, so similar to you guys, our business unit is very process heavy, right? And so there's a lot of manual work that our people do in terms of culling together data from spreadsheets and databases and responses from our end users. And so from our perspective, that may have been fine when we were a smaller organization, but the growth that we've seen in the last 5-6 years really spoke for a need to put solutions in place to whereby we weren't so reliant on that sort of manual processing, right? And so I think the impetus within our organization came from both folks on the operations side. They knew that we needed a solution in place to help with our processes, but I think the biggest champion was actually from our tech team, right? Like there were folks that were touting BPM as a way to solve these problems that our operations folks were seeing.
How did the operations folks respond to that? Because, and let me just give you the reason why I ask it like that is sometimes BPM is positioned as this panacea silver bullet, right? And the business has heard it all before in a way, right? Or operations, they've heard it all before. And so I'm curious how the operations team responded to the technology team bringing this new shiny object to the table.
Yeah, I think the key in those discussions was setting clear expectations, right? Like BPM isn't this sort of magic bullet that's going to like magically automate all of your problems, right? It's like some hard work that's required in documenting existing processes, figuring out the points that can be optimized and where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. And so I think it was having that frank conversation with our operations staff that really detailed what we could do within BPM and what we couldn't do, right? Like so I think that sort of frank setting of expectations was key in those discussions.
It's really interesting. One of the questions I want to understand, I'm always curious about criteria that you use to evaluate BPM, right? And so maybe if one of you, maybe we'll start with you, Faison. If you look at the different alternatives to BPM, what other options did you consider?
Yeah.
Right?
So I wasn't on the team when we made the solution to go with Bonitasoft as a BPM vendor, but I know the team that did kind of came up with this sort of ranking spectrum, right? Like they had 10 to 12 factors that they viewed as important, and went down a list, right? Like reached out to a couple different vendors, was very impressed with how Bonitasoft ranked along that spectrum. In terms of other solutions, I mean, we have a history of sort of building these sort of custom in-house applications.
Kind of BPM versus hand coding, right?
Right. And so, again, those types of solutions might have worked for our organization when we're a bit smaller, but there was definitely that realization, like as we're growing to scale and as we're projecting our growth going forward, that we can't just code our way out of it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I see this a lot, right? BPM versus hand coding. I did a project with the client not too long ago where they were looking at replacing a legacy application, PeopleSoft, or no, not PeopleSoft, Power Builder. It was a Power Builder based app. So anybody remember Power Builder in here, right? And so they were trying to figure out, should we use BPM to replace this app? And one of the issues was around, well, we don't want to buy a solution that we're going to have to replace in 10 years from now, right? And so a lot of what we were looking at is hand coding this in pure J2EE versus getting a BPM environment that's going to minimize some of the hand coding. So maybe if you can share, Doug, like the thinking around that. How did you guys look at this? BPM to accelerate development, right? To improve the speed of doing development and not necessarily having to do hand coding?
Yeah, I mean, that was a foundational element. So if we were to reflect on Faison's approach, we had an evaluation matrix that we used, and that was top on our list.
Okay.
Of being able, how can I get business requirements and then get to a solution fast, right? So we talked about this before, is about continuous delivery, but also continuous improvement. And the traditional approach to writing software is not going to get you to, it's not as fast as continuous improvement with at least a BPM solution that we've chosen. So
how, this is a question, I'm doing research on this now, right? To really do that side-by-side comparison. So I don't know if you can share, Joel, what does that improvement look like, right? Is it 25% improvement in development over hand coding when we look at BPM? Have any of you guys, maybe I should just open the floor, have any of you guys taken an initial look to say, we think we save 30% more time when we do BPM versus traditional development, hand coding? Anybody? That's a tough one,
That's
right?
a good one.
That's a tough one. But that's sort of questions that
we don't get. Personally, we don't have enough empirical information to basically say whether we know that our feeling is that we feel faster, right? And we know that based on being able to go for the time between requesting a change and implementing the change and getting to production is at least feels shorter, and it feels magnitudes shorter.
Right. I hate to needle you, but 30%, 50%, 100%, like what is the, right?
20%?
Okay.
25%? I don't know.
And we have,
I hesitate to give that because I don't want to go false sense of false sense of productive development, right? So I don't want.
Right.
I signed that disclaimer before this.
Yeah. No, and I think the initial numbers we have is 25 to 30%. And a lot of that is more around configuration that's more visual as opposed to hand coding if then else, let's say, statements.
So it's interesting you say that because I will say what the value that it provides for us is it allows our software developers to focus on business logic, which is achieving the business value, which achieves the business outcome.
Okay.
I'm with you. So the business outcome is the entire process, right? We focus our software developers on providing the functionality for the value, and they don't have to wire all that together. We have a business analysts that wire all of that business functionality together.
So separation of concerns helps a lot.
Right. So we've taken the software practice separation of concerns and actually put it into our business in the way that we go out and solve a business problem and achieve the business outcome.
So maybe we'll pull Joel into this since he was looking at me like, don't pull me in. I mean, what do you think? I mean, does that number sound reasonable? Or maybe if you want to share a little bit about where you see some of the savings, or where you think some of the time savings come from.
I mean, I think the numbers sounds reasonable. I will caveat, but I say we're doing a lot of customization to the platform. So I know our development team has been working a lot with Francois and his team on certain areas that require customization. It feels right. Like, you know, we picked the platform based on we recognized that we would have to customize whatever solution we went with, and we needed a lot of support. But again, I'm not as close to the development efforts as perhaps, you know, Doug or some of the other panelists. But yeah, I would say it feels right. You know, it's definitely an improvement to start with the BPM solution and then layer on what you need to in a customized way.
So what is the size of your teams? One of the perceptions of BPM, we have looked at this for a while. One of the perceptions around BPM is you need an army to drive a BPM initiative. And we do see clients where they'll have, I just spoke to a client recently where they're looking to scale up to 100, team of 100, right? But the data we have shows that the average BPM team size is about 3 to 6, right? So I'm curious in terms of the resources that you have. Maybe we start with Faison. What do you see in terms of team size and skill need?
Yeah, so we have a team of 5.
Yeah.
So we have 2 business analysts, 2 developers, and an infrastructure individual. So.
Okay.
For the process that we put out into production, I, as the business analyst, went in and created the process.
Okay.
And then our developers worked on hooking up the connectors and doing that sort of work. So I would say we have a pretty nimble team when it comes to.
What was the ramp up? Because that's another piece that we always hear as a, you know, I don't want to say a myth, but I mean, what do you see in terms of someone becoming skilled on being able to deliver BPM?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of creating that first process, I mean, I think with the help of Francois, I mean, we had it up.
Francois came in and just coded the whole thing.
Well,
so.
I wouldn't go that far. Francois came in for an afternoon and gave us some tips on kind of what we were and weren't doing well. I would say we got the first process up and going in about a week.
Okay. Okay.
So
first process up and going in about a week. But does that mean that the team was skilled enough to deliver the next one on their own?
I mean, yeah. I mean, we'll be the team that's working on the next process. So. I mean,
you need to move into some other things, not just helping teams get up to speed.
Yeah.
You need to do the healthcare website, right? That should be the next thing you move on to.
Yeah.
Right? On Bonitasoft, no less.
Yeah, for a bit of disclaimer, it was a pretty contained process, but it was something that we were brand new at, right?
Okay.
So there was a learning curve, but it was. I would say that it was pretty easy to go through.
Okay, Joel.
Yeah. So our team's a bit larger, but mainly because the engagement with our client is actually larger than this one piece. But you know, developers, we have 4 developers. We have a business team of 5, and then we have some other FTEs supporting different areas. But I would say, you know, on this effort, it's probably about 2.5 developers and 2.5, you know, business teams, you know, analysts, et cetera.
That matches up with what you guys have, or what's your size?
I think the interesting point, though, is for us, at least I hired 2 individuals right out of college. So two computer science students right out of college. I have a BA, a QA, and then I have what I call him the Oracle of CSC, who kind of like drops into everything.
So is he like a solution architect type person?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the guy is brilliant. He can drop in, see something really quickly, and so he's kind of he's someone we use in a situation when we need help. Getting ourselves out of maybe a problem. Not that we've gotten ourselves into problems, but because we don't really have that many problems currently, he's been helping our team a lot in trying to get in front of some of the business solutions that we have to implement. I'll say this: so we got our first solution implemented within the first couple of weeks of having Bonitasoft. But we needed to do those because the process that we were developing required some other foundational elements that were outside of Bonitasoft to be implemented. That's what took us the extended period.
So
of time.
really doing the initial kind of services setup, components.
I mean, that was literally a 2-week effort. So then the next 6 weeks were really just about writing those foundational elements.
So what are the base skills that you think are needed for the different roles to be successful? Like if we talk about a developer, is it primarily J2E development? It's interesting that you hired 2 grad students, right, out of college, and they were able to get going immediately. I mean, what sort of skills did you look for from a developer standpoint? Or did you just hire hacks that, you know?
So I guess I'll put my engineering hat on and say that software, and don't please the developers in the room, software is easy. And what I mean by that is it's just syntax, right? I really looked for the developers to have the analytical skill to understand what it was that they were implementing, right? Not, I don't care that you don't know Java. I don't care that they know Java. I don't care that I don't care that you don't know Groovy. Those are all things that are teachable, right? And especially with our implementation, we've really abstracted out our business logic out of Bonitasoft, and we're a service-oriented architecture. And because of that, we don't need to have those very defined skills or that level of expertise on my team right now, right? Because we call out to those services and get the responses. And basically, it's just really calling RESTful services, right? So calling REST inside of Bonitasoft, calling REST inside of an external web service, and then collating the responses together to then move to the next step in the process.
So it's really these softer skills that you were trying to get a handle on, and the ability for the person to do the analysis, but build consensus. Do you see that sort of?
I see the BA is the one building the consensus. Very similar to Faison. It sounds like, so the BA that's on my team is the customer-facing individual, but she's also the workflow engineer. That's what we call the individuals using Bonitasoft inside of the CSC. So they then sit down with our customer, and they're the ones who are the consensus builder in terms of the business process being implemented. And then when the business analyst gets to a point at which they need software development to occur in the process, that's when they engage with our software development team, our 2 developers that are on our team to implement, say, a connector to connect to a database. But what we're trying to do is abstract out that functionality to a point at which we can write reusable connectors, and then have her be able to just drop those connectors onto a process and just configure it through the connector wizards.
So let me ask this question, because telling my age a little bit, but I've been in BPM for a very long time. And I remember when I first got into BPM back in the 1900s, no, I'm just kidding, but in the early 2000s, a lot of BPM was sold with this vision of the business will go out and do the modeling and the development, right? How many of you guys have seen that in this scenario where the business is able to really engage? And let me ask it a little bit differently. Are you seeing where you can get the business involved in different aspects of the project? And if so, what aspects do you see as being very business oriented? The business can come in and really interact. So maybe if any of you want to respond to that, what aspect of BPM you see the business playing in the most?
I think that initial step of sort of getting a process diagram in place, we found that our business users love seeing that, right? They love me and our other business analysts sitting in a room with them for a day. Like, let's talk through everything that you do right here. Like, when this happens, what do you do? Let's draw it up. And there are a fair amount of our processes that are just very specialized and individualized, right? There's no sort of documentation of exactly what a person does throughout their sort of execution of a step. So we found that our business users have really enjoyed reacting to kind of seeing that, to seeing that sort of live within Bonitasoft.
How was it before? Right. What was it Visio?
It was
you
Visio.
Visio in. So
yeah.
So if you can maybe maybe if we can zoom in a little bit, is there something in the BPM environment you have now that is different from Visio? Because I think modelers, you know, Visio modeler versus a BPM modeler, you know, 90% the same. So what's different now?
I think being able to see that sort of connection to data sources is helpful, right? The fact that we can show them very quickly a query of real-time information is something that
So being able to bring back this is live,
right?
They can see it actually executing.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Yep. And so we do have some pretty savvy business users that we can envision going into Studio and doing that work on their own down the road.
Okay.
But what we found initially is just sort of in that sort of descriptive phase. They're really responding to kind of seeing this thing live.
Maybe Doug?
I guess I'll just add, it's in the modeler, when you're done modeling it, it's working software, right? Where Visio, it's not working software.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's good. So being able to play it back, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Being able to play
so
it
you
back.
can sit with the user. There's a difference between modeling a process in Visio and saying, does this work for you?
Yeah.
And there's another, then the other side is, this is a process in the Studio, and let's run it and see if it works.
Let me ask you this: what I see teams struggle with is trying to get requirements approved, right? Getting people on board and signing off. Has bringing in BPM changed your requirements process in any way, or how you think about requirements? Maybe it hasn't, but just curious if you've seen any change or need to change.
No, not for us.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we haven't implemented yet, but I don't see a big change yet as far as requirements. You know, this solution, this workflow will allow things to be auditable, right? And so you can track it, so you can ensure that requirements are met. But I don't think it's actually going to be changing requirements unless there's a need to actually change the underlying process and the requirements that are
The reason I ask
comprised.
is some teams, they actually use that model as the requirement document, right? And so, one of the clients I worked with early on around BPM, one of the things we started doing is just consider that model, the documentation, put as much richness in there so the business can come in and say, yep, this is how my process needs to execute. These are the steps involved. And that eliminated a lot of time for this back and forth, because people nowadays typically don't read the entire requirements document anyway. And so BPM becomes this living requirements document. And that's kind of, I don't want to call it a trend, but we see some teams move in that direction, and it may be something to look at. So let's shift for a second, because I think one of the challenges around BPM is, I think we talked about this a little bit before, is educating the business on the benefits of BPM, right? How do you talk to business stakeholders, and really even IT stakeholders in some case, about what BPM is and what the benefits are? And the reason I ask this is because you guys saw the presentation that I did, saw some of the other presentations. Just the term BPM means so many different things, right? Some people think it means business process modeling. Some people think it means, I had someone come up with a whole new term for BPM, right? Business procurement management or something crazy. It means so many different things. So how do you guys talk to the business and other stakeholders to get them to understand or see the benefit and opportunity of BPM? So maybe we'll start from you.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely had some stakeholders that had initially pushed back. They saw it, okay, we're bringing in this new tool for them to use, and it's just another tool I'm going to have to learn how to use, and I already know how to use these tools, or I know my spreadsheets, and so that was part of the groundwork, the upfront work to ensure
So
that we
basically
had
get
buy-in,
rid of
right?
spreadsheets. That's how you advertise
Yeah.
it. Get rid of spreadsheets.
Exactly. Except a lot of those
Exactly.
people love their spreadsheets. So
GRS, I like that. Get rid, no, GROS. Get rid of spreadsheets.
is there another S? So, we really our methodology was. I mean, I think there are there are definitely stakeholders that see the benefits right away. Like this
Okay.
is going to be more efficient. It's going to, the workflow solution is going to remind me of my tasks. Things like that. It will get rid of my spreadsheets. So people see it. And I think just presenting those facts, in a manner, in a conversation, was allowed us to sort of get around some of the pushback that we were seeing. I think there were a couple cases of internal stakeholders that were worried about, their utility within the organization being compromised from this solution because, they owned, a portion of this process and they were sort of the gatekeepers, and so we saw that in a couple places, but, the conversation there is just, you're going to be able to devote your time to these higher, value add activities. So it's definitely tricky at times, but some stakeholders see it right away, and some
Really
concerned about other.
Because one of the perceptions of BPM, we always see this is it's a tool to reduce headcount, right? And so no, like serious, right? And so when the BPM team or somebody's going in and trying to promote BPM, there's resistance around, at the frontline level, let's say. Does this mean my job is going to go away? Right. And so you sometimes don't get that level of buy-in that's needed at the front line. I don't know if you talked about it, but is that?
It's interesting because we didn't, so a couple of stakeholders, I shouldn't call them stakeholders, but a couple of our clients that we met with sort of had that concern. And we didn't really need their buy-in, right? So we had our sponsors and stakeholders, but you sort of do need their buy-in in a sense. This was moving forward, without them, but you kind of want to get them on board so that they are, so they speak well and so they get it and can, ensure adoption throughout the organization because, that's something you don't want. You don't want to implement a tool and then don't see user adoption.
So you want to get that buy-in, is what you're saying. So what about you guys? I mean, have you seen, in terms of selling first, how have you sold BPM in terms of the benefits? So maybe if you can talk a little bit, Doug, about. You're the master salesman of BPM. Come on.
There was something you mentioned, and I made myself a mental note, and I'm trying to remember it, but apparently my brain's not as good as it used to be.
Process for mental notes.
Exactly. Where's Evernote?
I know.
How did we sell it? So we did a proof of concept. In our organization.
So getting people to see it, right?
So we, during the evaluation process, we did a proof of concept, and then we basically said, this is the benefit of doing this, right? So we used the HR onboarding process. We know that Bonita has one on their website, but so we used an onboarding process to model out what we currently do for our current HR onboarding process. Got it up and running within a week.
Quick win, right?
And then we basically said, okay, well, this is what we have, let's start talking about it. And so I called it the Bonita, or the Workflow Roadshow. So we went on a roadshow inside of our organization showing
that's good marketing.
Exactly, showing the value of the tool, not just the outcome of it, but also how easy it was for us to implement the solution. And we used the argument of, I had a BA who was never a BA before. And not technical at all. Maybe she's an anomaly, but she was able to gather the business requirements and then take those business requirements and turn them into a working piece of software. And that happened in a very short period of time.
Do you market BPM using the term BPM? Like
no. I was just going to say, you hit on this. We don't use BPM. We use workflow, right? Because our stakeholders understand workflow. And I don't want to go through this, this workflow. BPM equals workflow equals efficiency. I want them to hear workflow equals efficiency. And maybe productivity. Other stuff, right? But For us, we use workflow. BPM is something that when I came into this, admittedly, I always started BPM as workflow.
Yeah.
And my, I guess, business process modeling.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Obviously, 9 months. Well, I came into this completely new, by the way. Right? So prior, I'm not the 1990s or the 1900s.
The old
like you.
1900s. Yeah, I'm 100 years old.
But I was never a business process. I'm a software engineer, a hardcore developer coming into this position, looking at a tool and doing the evaluation, and then picking a tool, and then realizing, why wasn't I doing this before?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. The more teams I work with, the more we see the shift away from really promoting this shiny object and giving it a big label, but really trying to look at it as a tool for driving outcomes. And so one of the teams that I worked with, they had a big Six Sigma initiative, Six Sigma program. And they learned anytime they go into a business unit, even though they were great at going in and modeling the process and figuring out what needs to be improved, 9 times out of 10, the business really didn't want to engage with them because they saw it as, okay, these guys are coming with this, fancy methodology. And even though they would engage with the business would be happy at the end, just the label itself could be off-putting. So that's something to think about in terms of labels. But maybe Faizan, if you could share how you sold or how your organization sold the benefits of BPM or positioned the benefits to get buy-in.
No, I like Doug's idea of the roadshow. We've done that on sort of a smaller scale in the last week or so. We've kind of finalized a presentation to a non-technical audience. We just start with sort of explaining what BPM is. We put up this diagram of ordering at pizza and kind of explain to them.
Pizza.
Yeah.
So,
we have the lanes of the chef and the delivery guy and that sort of thing. And we kind of use that as an example of the value of documenting a process and kind of just seeing it and seeing how a process can be improved. And then we bring it into describing our pilot project and the lessons we learned and the outcomes that we derive from that. And then we transition that into a discussion of kind of projects that we think within their space would benefit from BPM, and then sort of solicit ideas within their sort of work streams to kind of talk through some candidates for work to go into the BPM. And so we're thinking this approach will kind of be a more effective way of sort of setting expectations in the right way and making sure BPM doesn't sort of become this sort of panacea of magic, right? That we kind of feared it might get into without these sort of concrete, tangible examples.
One of the things, in starting to wrap up before we open up the questions, I always wanted to start, and I should do this, I wanted to start a blog post series called BPM's Dirty Little Secrets, right? Because I think there's these secrets that people don't learn about BPM until they're knee deep into it, right? And I'm curious if maybe before we open it up for questions, if each one of you could share what you see as something that you learned during the journey around BPM that you wish you had known before you started. So I don't know if this is as provocative as a dirty little secret, right? But just if I'm sitting in the audience, someone in the audience shoes, and I'm thinking, hey, this BPM thing sounds really great. What is one thing that you would share that you wish you would have known that could have helped you at that time, right? So just let's keep it to BPM, no other dirty secrets here, no confessions, right? So maybe I'll give a second. I feel like I'm on Jeopardy. Final, what is it? It's Final Jeopardy. That tells you how much I watch Jeopardy, right? Maybe Joe?
Sorry, I think for me, I think just ensuring that the processes themselves are optimized before you start on, developing a solution, right? So we actually ran into that. I wasn't on the engagement at the time, but the client had their processes set out, and we began developing a tool for that. We basically developed but didn't go into production because then at that point they decided to revise a lot of their sort of risk metrics, et cetera. So a lot of the processes changed, and we basically had to develop from scratch. So I don't know if that really speaks to
Yeah, I
your question,
think
but it's
that's,
more of upfront. It's just,
yeah.
I guess, ensuring your process, take a hard look at your processes before, going toward the tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good best practice in terms of
Yeah.
automation, right? If you automate a bad process, it's still a bad process, right?
Exactly.
So maybe Faison, did you?
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. The idea of having a well-defined scope going into the creation of a process, right? Because once you get into the studio and see the gazillion cool things that you can do, right?
It becomes distracting, almost blinding, right?
Yeah. So going into that process with a well-defined scope is something we knew going in, but it was just really hammered home as we were kind of working on this discrete project that it was just nice to have that sort of narrow scope going in.
I know, tough.
You're thinking of what I wish I knew before, and let me ask you a question so I can maybe try to give you an answer, a better answer. Do you mean by going in and looking at tools, or after we've picked the tool?
After you've picked the tool, right?
Okay.
It could be both, but I know we were talking earlier a little bit about the importance of the community. Sound like that. You wish you knew how the community would play a role in supporting you, I guess the best way to, but maybe if you can elaborate.
For us, we're in a little bit of a different situation, I guess, than maybe some other folks that haven't purchased a tool. But I wish we would have known about. You mentioned the community, but gosh, I'm sorry. I'm struggling to find the answer to your question, because there's not much that we didn't run up against, because we did go through a very extensive evaluation process.
So what's one piece of advice you give to someone sitting here thinking about BPM? What thing do you think would be important to understand at this stage that could help them?
Well, first, is it the right fit for what you're trying to solve, right? So for us, we knew it was, because we're a service organization. But as if you're ordering pizzas, is it really necessary to buy a tool to implement that process? So are you doing a one-off process, or are you doing are you trying to provide processes across an entire organization?
So be clear about what you're trying to.
What's the end game, right?
Yeah.
So what's your end game? Is the end game that I have one process that I'm going to implement, and that's it? Maybe Bonitasoft or BPM isn't the right solution, but if you know that you're going to have multiple processes, you're going to have an ecosystem of processes that are interacting with each other, then it's a no-brainer to pick a solution that can help you implement the business process and allowing your software development teams to focus on what they do best.
And I know we talked about this actually during the break, that for you guys, you have a very target-rich environment around process improvement, right? You are a service company, so there's a lot of opportunity. It almost sounds like for some, there may not be that target-rich environment, and just trying to figure out, do you start very small and try to build up and get buy-in over time? Or do you have a lot of a pipeline of opportunities? Like for you guys, it sounded like that was a big opportunity.
Again, I think it's a case-by-case situation, right?
Yep.
For anyone that's looking at it, it's a solution that BPM is a solution that will help you get to the end goal faster. So is getting to the outcome faster what you're looking for, or do you want something that's a long-term solution that you can continue to expand and grow
over time?
Yeah.
So do we have time for questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's open it up to these guys for questions. They're here for you. I'm going to get up and go on this. No. But maybe, how many of you are considering BPM in terms of buying a BPM tool at this point? Nobody? I guess I'm the only person that's thinking about it. Okay, so I'll leave my hand. Okay, so maybe ask a question in terms of development, deployment, best practices. Yeah.
I do have a question here. For after you decided you guys to want a BPM solution, what was the top 3 criteria that you decided on Bonita?
Yeah. What were the top 3 criteria that made you decide on Bonita? That's a very good question. Who wants to start? It's just like, can you turn the camera off?
So I can start, but just to say that, I think typically we would have liked to have the luxury of time to really evaluate the options, and we had very constrained timelines when we were deciding. We had used Bonitasoft, or the open source, internally within our company, so we knew of it. But I think for us, really the main thing was the level of support that came with it. So we have our development team, but we knew we would need support. So that was a big item. We did a very quick analysis, and I actually wasn't on the project at the time, to make sure that it would fit with the processes and the objectives that we were facing. But again, it was very a short decision. Had we had more time, we would have looked at certain metrics or criteria, but we just didn't have that luxury. Okay. So I don't know if Faizan or Doug can probably better speak to some of the differentiators.
So again, I wasn't on the team when we made the selection, but my understanding of the selection process was level of service and support was a huge factor, number of available connectors, and the ability to talk to systems that our applications use frequently was a big factor, and then maturity of the organization was a big one for us also.
How about you?
Faizan hit a couple of ours, which was maturity of the organization and the solution, the number of connectors. There were the ease of process development, which would be taking a business analyst and having them design the process, but then also the ability to extend it. Okay. Because we know we have very unique use cases that we want to be in a position of having a tool in place that allows us that flexibility, that we don't have to worry about getting on some big monolithic application pipeline for, or, I'm sorry, product pipeline for a big provider. So they were, I'll say this, Bonitasoft was right in our sweet spot of what we wanted, and we evaluated probably. We had a long list of 12 or more tools, narrowed it down to a list of 5, then obviously 3, and then we did cost benefit and looked at everything.
Did you do a bake-off?
We did. We did a bake-off, which was part of part of our proof of concept, right?
Okay.
And then we bake-off.
Sorry.
And we made brownies.
Yes. French pastries.
And we modeled the process, the steps.
At the very end, right? Okay, so that's the best practice.
Yeah, go ahead. Question that you mentioned, because you use SOA and REST services, and you want flexibility of change. So how is your experience with this change management in Bonita? In particular, what happens when let's say you have version 1 of REST service here, version 2, and this protocol changes over time? How do you manage that in Bonita?
Do you mean by the process? So we'll talk about, you're talking about implementation, right?
So you have the Bonita process here, and it talks to various systems, and they may change their interface, and you also, your process instances, think of archived instances, on-the-fly instances, and the one that's gonna come in future when you deploy a new version.
Right.
How do you manage reporting and all these things? Is that an easy experience?
Well, I'll say that we're very young in our implementation, that we've not run into that scenario. I wish you would be talking to us in about a year from now when I could really answer that question. But I will say that providing an API, architecturally best practice, if you're changing the API that a URL points to, it's probably not good. The physical interface that I must change everyone's implementation, you might want to version that particular API, so that way anyone else is pointing to the old guy doesn't necessarily have to change, right? There are other things, I guess you could abstract out the call to it, to the API, maybe have a back-end system that monitors, that it reads, when I hit this step, what's the newest version of that process, or that API rather, that I should call, and then I'll call it. But that's a lot of architectural stuff, like when you're doing the physical implementation.
So I think the part that you mentioned, you have a person zero experience does that. I think that difference you would notice on the long run, a person who's not experienced would not take out things that are important that make change management easier. The person will have short-sighted view to make it going, but then afterwards, things that would change would come, person who has the experience would see the pain point of change management. So I think that's.
So your question is that you feel that you would want to have someone in a position of with more experience than taking.
Because it's not about things getting out there, it's about change management.
One thing that I will say for BPM teams and BPM vendors, and I think Bonitasoft can probably kind of chime in at some point to answer this question, but a lot of BPM vendors have a set of design best practices that is part of that initial ramp up, right? So I know vendor I worked with or partnered with in the past, you know, our team had this Bible of best practices that we learned over a period of time that when we go into a client, we're saying, this is how you want to architect, this is how you want to think about change management. Depending on the tool, and like I say, Bonitasoft can talk to this, some tools actually handle that natively, right? I hadn't looked as deeply as I probably should have at Bonitasoft, but that's one of the things that BPM can provide is this change management, configuration management, so you get it across instances. You know, whether it's a live instance, archive instance, you can actually have an association between what version of the API should be used for new, what version should be used for old, but it really depends on how does the engine handle state management in terms of the actual web service call. When it creates that instance, does it take a snapshot of the API or the service as it was when it started? Or does it actually try to do call it at runtime, right? And so there's some changes you can do around that. But
so do you currently have Bonita in-house right now? All right. So when a process is in flight, it's going to point to all. You know, you're not. If you change something, it's going to stay the state at which it was before. That snapshot that you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
So if you change a URL or a version, it's not going to impact those in-flight processes that are currently in flight, right?
Well, that depends how you implement. If you use built-in everything hard-coded, the same as I think like it's like sort is a visual programming, but you can do the worst practice to do in Java,
right.
Hard-coding numbers, now you can do there as well.
Yeah.
So you could take out these things, let's say labels, things that could change. If you make them external, so you can change them on the fly. So the two, not just the process, you can reconfigure it on the fly. Things that don't change the logic, but could change the look.
Maybe we should take that offline.
Well, I think
from
what
a
you're talking
time
about is
standpoint.
configuration management,
Yeah.
right? And externalizing it from the tool, not having it internal. I think is that correct? Okay.
So I think we're getting one of these things.
You are getting a little bit of a.
Okay.
Where's the music?
I know, it's like I can feel it in my back. So I think we're gonna turn it over for the next set.
So thank you everybody, and that was terrific. And we're going to just do a quick change here, and then we're actually going to dive into Bonita, and we're going to build an application. So I think some of these questions on Bonita best practices or process design can be asked and come out while we actually have the application up and running. So we'll do a quick switch over here. I really want to thank all the panelists, Faizan, Joel, Doug, and Clay. So thank you guys for taking the time, and we'll be back in 1 minute, maybe 2.